Welcome back to Universal Disaster, a storyline that should have ended after its second installment. See, I can make the same dumbfounded claims Terminator fans always use, and you would agree with me with a baseless statement. In any case, I'm AJ, and this video will go over the remaining 3 installments of the storyline. It's a trilogy. And what does this trilogy entail? Frederator! As the name suggests, each installment focuses on a show from the animation company while utilizing the time hole as a framing device. To be honest, these installments are not as intense or intriguing as its former duology. However, as I was revising these parts, I noticed each was more akin to a deconstruction element of what came before. I'll bring them up as we go along. So, Universal Disaster 3 takes place in 2011 and focuses on Fairly Odd Parents. But don't expect Timmy or his godparents. Instead, it focuses on the side character Mark Pacheng. His thing was that he was an alien and fighting sometimes his fiancée and sometimes his killer Mandy. By this point, the show was heavily prioritizing on Foop or Crocker as the recurring villain for each episode. So Mark decided to settle his relationship issues once and for all. When he asked Timmy to help, he said he couldn't do it, but he knew someone he could, his friend AJ. But Mark went to the wrong AJ. Instead, he went to myself OC. Regardless, he offered his assistance, and since this was a Viacom alignment conflict, it would be a perfect opportunity to use the time hole that was still present at Orlando. However, since 2011, the 4 heroes had been split. Todd and Mauricia got together again, so they were out of the picture. Sari's show got cancelled, and she was still recovering from that loss, and Peter was busy filming a movie. Though not to leave AJ hanging, Peter sent his good friend Gwen to help him out, even though this was pre-Ghost Spider, so she couldn't fight that well. Regardless, the 3 used the time hole to bait Mandy in there, and the 3, or in this case, the 2 of them, had to fight her in various time periods. Universal Disaster 3 is pretty boring in my opinion. It just retraces stuff from the first 2 installments. Unlike the previous installments where Todd wants to fall back in love, Mark is falling out of it. Plus, the show was on a steady decline, Nicktoons Blast was showing its age, and the Orlando studio had been abandoned for over 5 years. At the end of the day, Mark kills Mandy, and everybody goes home. A fitting, anticlimactic ending, since by that point the show was focusing on a live-action trilogy, adding unnecessary characters, changing the animation to Flash. Look, we can have an hour-long discussion on where and when Fairly Odd Parents should have ended, but I got a video to finish. But one thing caught AJ's attention. The time hole was still vacant. Since Sammy was still serving his sentence in Hell's Prison, nobody's really claiming his invention as their property. So he decided to bring it back home. But since the only locations the device can travel to was in the Viacom alignment, there wasn't an immediate need to use it. So Universal Disaster 3 was a bust, mainly because it focused on a show that was past its heyday. Nobody seemed to care about Federator's flagship show by the 2010s. What one may consider to be a sacrilege for this video, let's head over to Cartoon Network. I was at the ripe age to be an Adventure Time fan. Granted, the merchandise was far and few, everybody couldn't get enough of the show. It had a level of surrealist and abstract humor that both it and regular show triumphed over Cartoon Network. For me, I was more interested in the lore and world building. In my opinion, Season 3 and 4 was peak Adventure Time content and theories. What was the Mushroom War? Who was Betty? What were the vile creatures underground humans? And why did Jake say one of them sounded like his mother? And how did Peppermint Butler know so much about the dark arts? Was he secretly working with the Lich King? All of these questions ran around my head when I was a 6th grader, that I wanted to get not only answers, I wanted them now. Granted, AJ didn't have access to a time machine to get the answers right away, but he came up with a loophole. All of Federator's shows actually started out as pilots and shorts that were featured on Oya Cartoons and Random Cartoons on Nickelodeon. One of these pilots was Adventure Time. Yes, Adventure Time got its start on Nickelodeon before Cartoon Network greenlit the show. Because of this faint connection, the time hole allowed an alternate timeline path to the lands of Ooh. Universal Disaster 4 occurred in June of 2012. He recruited Jake, who was somewhat skeptical, and Flame Princess, who had no interest in being there. Anyway, once they began to investigate the underground tunnels, there was no evidence, yet they had to fight some dwellers. But Jake couldn't confirm nor deny any of them as his deceased mother, and Flame Princess was losing her fire rapidly. But AJ continued to press forward for answers, and what he found behind one door was a blank space. No, really, it was actually blank. That's because the Adventure Time Entertainment property was artificial, meaning the universe in Shareverse is incomplete and is only formed once the entertainment rights are completed, i.e. when the show concludes. For organic entertainment properties, the Astro Souls sign NDAs with the company to not spoil the events of their properties until it's officially released for normal Souls. That meant all my theories were not going to get their immediate answers, and I would have to wait like everybody else. I hated this because my theories always clashed with what really happened. My theory of Betty traveling to an alternate universe and becoming that universe's version of the Ice Queen was thrown out the window when it was revealed that Betty was actually a time traveler and she would subsequently become the final boss. And this was all after I stopped watching the show. Oh yeah, I stopped caring for Adventure Time, mainly because of the extremely disappointing letdown of a season premiere for Season 5. But then Digimon came back into my life, so I was occupied with that anyway. The deconstructing element of Universal Disaster 4 consists of realizing the time hole can't solve every problem, and sometimes are left better for theories and waiting for confirmations. But this installment became a lesson for me. Don't interact with Astro Soul's backstories that are still shrouded in mystery, and wait for it to be told when the time comes. Because when you expect your theories to be true, you would often be disappointed with the reveal. So, I concluded not to use the time hole for shows that were both in progress of world building and shows not in the spotlight anymore. But what if I did one that was not popular, but cancelled with its storytelling? Originally, the Frederator Trilogy was going to cover all of the shows, featuring Chalk Zone for 4 and Fanboy and Chum Chum for 5. However, I decided to scrap these two since I never had a full attachment for Chalk Zone warrant enough to be placed in Universal Disaster, and while I consider Fanboy and Chum Chum to be a guilty pleasure, I understand not everybody likes this show. Plus, it would be a distraction to the main plot of Universal Disaster 5, which leads us into the final part of the trilogy and the redemption of one teenage robot. If you watched my Digimon Fusion review prior, or even seen the runtime, you might assume that I believe Nickelodeon screwed over that show the most. I'd like to believe that there were two other shows that got it worse, Invader Zim and My Life as a Teenage Robot, or Malatter for short. With Fusion, Nickelodeon couldn't cancel it. It was in their contract they had to air all 54 episodes of the English dub while giving Saban a checklist of what to censor. With Malatter, because it was a homegrown Nicktoons, they could cancel the show whenever they wanted. They could have canceled the show after one season. If a show isn't bringing in SpongeBob numbers, it's deemed a failure. And it's a damn shame too. Frederator really hit it big with Malatter, a unique aesthetic inspired by 1920s to 50s interpretations of science fiction, kick-ass fight scenes, continuity between episodic episodes, and it was the first Nicktoons to feature a female lead that guys could relate to. Yeah, we had Nicktoons like As Told by Ginger and the Wild Thornberries that had a girl as the main character, but never one that boys would find awesome. Jenny broke that norm. Maybe a little too much. One aspect I loved about this show was the escalation and storytelling. It's pretty much perfect. Season 1 sets up the main characters, recurring characters, and the world building. Season 2 adds in a few new characters while advancing some plot points from the first season, with Season 3 primarily focusing on episodes that progress character development. And Season 4 onwards, you would progress the story until you reach a finale. However, as I made it obvious, Malatter didn't get that ending. Season 1 had a really good time slot airing with the other Nicktoons on primetime weekend nights. But this was short-lived, with Season 2 having terrible time slots, to the point where Nickelodeon canceled the show even though Season 3 was still in mid-production. With that in mind, a lot of Season 3 episodes have a sense of finality or closure with some of the side characters. They really did try their best to resolve plots as much as possible, but as we'll see, they didn't get to all of them. Nickelodeon would then release the season on Nicktoons, their sister channel, Years after the show's cancellation, when I noticed that the show was never going to get a proper conclusion, I knew I could use it to tie loose ends. Season 2's Brad Venture introduces the character of Melanie, who, much like Jenny, is a teenage robot, though she hides it more than Jen. She appears again in a Season 3 episode, but it ends on a really downer note, where she leaves the show heartbroken. All because Jenny was such an annoying bitch. She was definitely out of character in that episode. Her father/creator, Dr. Locus, does return in the last episode of the series, but he shows up at the very end, and his defeat is heavily rushed. You can tell that the writers really wanted to somehow squeeze Melanie's character arc before the show ended. And if you're wondering, no, Melanie does not appear in this episode. This seems like a perfect opportunity to use Melanie to grant some proper closure on her character. AJ getting her contacts wasn't too difficult. The second, though, it was another story. Jenny was a depressed mess following the cancellation of her show. Because Melatter is an artificial entertainment property, her show never had a conclusion even in Shareverse. It was so bad to the point where she cut herself off from her robot body and lived in a human skin over that robot appearance. Unlike the exosuit, this was a more realistic appearance. When myself OC offered the opportunity initially, she turned it down, having no interest in going back to Nick. Trust me, I wouldn't blame her. But right before leaving, Jenny changed her mind. Even though she left Melanie on bad terms, she now had one chance to make it right. As the two entered Universal Orlando, almost immediately, Jenny's rogue gallery heard about what was she doing and began to attack her in the time hole. Oh wait, how was the time hole able to create portals outside of Orlando? Yeah, about that. In May of 2013, Universal Disaster 5 happens as the two robot teens enter the time hole. AJ was going to follow behind, but he was stopped by the Viacom Alignment's entertainment manager of the time, the Alignment's equivalent to Mickey, Woody Woodpecker. He was invited to attend a meeting to discuss the current state of the time hole and what to do with it. Because of Sammy's absence over the years, the device was starting to become unstable from its most recent usage. So much so, outsiders from the park began to use it and contact others in the Viacom Alignment to mess with it, such as the case for Universal Disaster 5. So there was an urgency to destroy the time hole altogether. Not only that, but there was another issue at hand during the meeting. The year prior, the Disney Alignment had recently acquired an Astro co-owner for the company, and Woody saw this as a competition. Despite him being the creator of the Looney Tunes and shipping them over to the Warner Alignment in the 20th century, shameless plug to Fox Kids Special Part 4 to explain that, it was only a matter of time before the Viacom Alignment would hit hard with competition. He was looking for new blood to take over as the head entertainment manager for the alignment. AJ was one of these contenders, but since he has ties to other alignments, that was not likely. Another contender in the meeting was Carmilla, the Maiden of Vampires. In recent years, she had begun to take an interest in marketing and companies, as well as investing in entertainment rights in the Viacom Alignment. However, Woody couldn't come up with a justifiable outcome. All the while, the time hole was still active, with people running around alternate time periods within. Jenny and Melanie were sometimes in the same time periods, and other times they were not. They occasionally fought with one another, and other times they were fighting with other foes. But all this came together when the two were separated for the final time. Throughout the journey, Melanie stayed in her human appearance, occasionally showing off hints of her robot endoskeleton for fighting. But her final opponent, ironically enough, was her father. Locus had not seen his daughter for over 6 years, and because of that, he twisted his body into a robotic travesty to remedy the loss of his masterpiece. He was the one who allowed the other villains to gain access to the time hole, all for this moment, to prove to Melanie that she is nothing more but a walking disaster. But Melanie was better than falling for this trick. She was not afraid to show her true self. She entered her creator's life and left the time hole. One of the more interesting episodes of Melatter is Return of Raggedy Android, a Season 1 episode, which is a sequel to another Season 1 episode. The exoskeleton depicted in the episode was sentient and much more controlling to fulfill Jenny's destiny of being a normal girl. It then attaches itself onto the racist to robots Scottish bartender, and that's never resolved. Granted, we do see the bartender in a later episode, so we must assume that the exoskeleton separated after being incompatible. Regardless, a beat-down but modified version of the suit attacked Jenny in 2013, taunting and mocking her for still being a robot underneath her human exterior. Ultimately, Jenny destroys the exoskeleton once and for all, but her final battle was yet to come, her arch-nemesis, Vexus. Similarly, Vexus began to taunt and scold Jenny for refusing to fight back, as well as calling her XJ9, the name she usually associates Jenny with. Vexus realized that this was not even fun, so she used her signature way of retreating, monologuing about how the cluster will invade Earth all the while there is a giant portal directly to Cluster Prime. But this time, it was different. Jenny immediately attacked Vexus mid-monologue. Jenny had completely snapped. She shed her human appearance to reveal her classic robot form. She got the upper hand in the fight and proceeded to wreck Vexus until she was ultimately dead. Eventually, Jenny Wakeman was the last living being that was inside the time hole. It had become too unstable to be left open once Locus had died. As the meeting came to an end, Woody and his potential candidates walked up to the time hole in preparation to shut it down. Melanie pleaded for them to wait since Jenny still wasn't out. But a robot figure began to emerge. She set her sights right to AJ, taking his blade, and began to stab herself. She considered herself a monster to the world, and she was asking him to end her life. And this is where the deconstruction element of Universal Disaster 5 occurs. Sorry and the duology embraced her robot origins and appearance, especially by 2. Jenny, on the other hand, repressed it so much to the point where she believed she didn't deserve to live anymore. However, Carmilla interferes and tells Jenny if she becomes the entertainment manager for the Viacom alignment, she will find a place for Jenny. This was enough for her to calm down and recover, while the time hole officially collapsed in on itself. This one action convinced Woody to allow Carmilla to run the Viacom alignment while he acted as a supervisor. Under new rule, the Viacom alignment, which includes Viacom, Comcast, Universal, CBS, NBC, Lionsgate, so on and so on and so on, would be led into a brighter world under the coordinates of a new Astro Soul manager. And that is the end of the original Universal Disaster storyline. This storyline was a unique one to get back into, revising how a rat runs a militaristic robot company, the empty void of waiting for a show to give its viewers answers, and a look back at how Universal was in those years. There is a reboot series, but I'm not going to be starting that right now. But if you want to hear more storylines, and you enjoyed this one, consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. With that, I'm AJ, and I'll see you all in the next one.